Hi, everyone, and welcome to the In the Shoes of podcast, where I make it my goal to see life as much as possible from someone else's point of view. Just like we all have a unique heartbeat, every single one of us sees life only from our own perspectives. Think about it. Can you see and process life exactly as Elon Musk sees and processes life? The answer is you can't, and it applies to every living conscious being here on this pale blue dot. Holy shit, have I got a show for you today. I have a handful of authors that I put in my top 10 list. And my guest today is seriously in the top 3 echelon. No joke. I'm pretty sure he deserves some award for that, but I don't have any money, so words at this time will have to do. I'm speaking with Christopher Moore, and you should read his books, like all of them. I started recording mid-conversation because why would I deprive Christopher Moore fans of his thoughts on just about anything, right? Including Los Angeles, which is what we happen to be talking about when I hit the red record button.
Seems to have gotten better to where your lungs don't burn, being there. My problem with LA is driving there, which is just personal to me. People who really don't mind driving, it's they don't mind it, but it's just so stressful. Like I live right in the center of San Francisco, and I would say I walk to 99% of the places I go, 90% of the places I go. And my first few years, if it was far, I would take a bus, because at that point there was no Uber or Lyft or anything like that.
After talking about LA, I wanted to find out if it was true that Chris's life reflected that of Tommy's in Blood-Sucking Fiends when he moved to San Francisco. He was, of course, much younger back then.
Yeah, the character is based on, I think, sort of how I was at the time. My experience doesn't parallel to that, obviously.
Unless Christopher Moore actually became a vampire when he moved to San Francisco. I'm just putting that out there, not trying to spread any rumors or anything.
But being a kid from a small factory town in the Midwest and coming into California and the way Tommy reacts to the world is sort of that's parallel with my experience. And certainly his, he runs a night crew at a very young age, and that was my experience as well. And so all of the grocery stuff that happens in that book is based on my experience. And so, yeah, that's the most autobiographical character I've ever written, but it's me at 19, not me at, 60. So.
Oh, yeah, totally. Well, one time I was out in San Francisco and I thought I went to the Safeway where Tommy supposedly worked.
Well, that's a real place. I mean, it's the only one that I think is right across from the water. So if you were at one that was across from Fort Mason in the water, you were there.
Dude, nice. That was admittedly a pretty cool moment for me out there. Is there one specific character that you relate more closely with?
Everything's a snapshot in time. And so, my characters, a lot of them, I think just because of the function of how they react to the world, and they're always sort of, hapless guys with limited skills, which is sort of how I view myself. But Charlie Asher was really, I was trying to define what a beta male was, because it hadn't been sufficiently defined for me among human beings. And I really did quite a bit of research looking for it, but I had written a book called Fluke, and which had a lot of evolutionary biology in it, and I spent a lot of time with scientists and in the field dealing with things like elephant seal rookeries and whale behavior and stuff like that, where there really is hierarchical positions of an alpha female or an alpha male and a beta male and so forth, and that hadn't been sufficiently defined for me in it's sort of human culture, and so that's what Charlie Asher was really. I wanted to build that character into someone who uses his imagination, basically is the big teeth of his survival, which is how I defined the beta male, is the fact that they weren't the fastest or the biggest or the strongest, but they were the ones who could look far enough ahead in the future to go, maybe chasing a mastodon with a pointy stick is not the best strategy for survival.
Right.
And so they survived. And in the natural world, there's always a lot more beta males than there are alpha males.
Sure.
So somehow they're passing on their genes, So that was basically where Charlie Asher came from. And I wanted to have a character that could, sort of rise to the occasion of the, this sort of wild supernatural challenge that would come to him. And also, I mean, the original thought for that book, For a Dirty Job, was I probably wrote on a pad of paper in like 1998, and it was just, what if a hypochondriac got the job of being Beth? That's where that book begins, and so everything else is filling in to make that into a story that's got dimension.
Yeah.
And that's where Charlie comes from. So certainly he has aspects of my character, but in other ways he doesn't. And I like to write characters that differ from me physically quite a bit. Like my fool in a couple of my books is tiny, and I'm not tiny. But I liked the idea of really making it, that character of the jester physically powerless as well as politically powerless.
I'm not entirely sure why I kept going with this line of questioning. However, I still wanted to find out if, just maybe, he was an amalgamation of any number of his characters.
You may find this as well, that, people want to make everything autobiographical.
Oh, of course.
And that's certainly, if you're a literary novelist, it's always considered, your first book is always supposed to be autobiographical. And that's why you have so many, sort of not particularly insightful coming of age books. And occasionally somebody will hit a nerve with something like, and I remember in my career, the sort of coming of age books that really hit the American popular culture were Bright Lights, Big City and Less Than Zero in the late 80s. We had these guys who just sort of had this introduction to almost anarchistic drug culture and so forth. But that's the literary tradition. If you're the kind of guy, I got an MFA and I'm going to write novels and then I'm going to go teach in MFA programs. Whereas those of us who are out in the genres, we tend to be like, well, I'm not really going to be able to apply much of my life experience into writing this Viking. And so you make a lot more stuff up and you just use your experience the way an actor would use the Stanislavski method to say, okay, what emotionally do I have that relates to this character's situation, but not so much autobiographical. And you also run out of stuff really fast if you keep writing. I used all the jobs I had ever done as an adult by the time I finished my third book, which was Bloodsucking Fiends, and I had to learn some other thing to write about. So I had my main pilot in my fourth book my main character in my fourth book is a pilot. So I had to learn enough about flying aircraft to make him credible. And I talked to a lot of pilots and I hung out with pilots and I learned to fly a helicopter a little bit, which is not something you want to learn to do a little bit. That's the other thing about it is you can't, your stuff can't be autobiographical. I guess it could be, but I don't know how interesting it would be because you admittedly are going to spend a great deal of your time in a room by yourself making clicky noises on a keyboard. So that's why in the old days, adventurers used to go adventure and writers used to write about them, and it was only probably in the late 60s, early 70s that people started having adventures and writing about them as well.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. So I really want to talk about the book, A Dirty Job. It's so visceral, yet so damn funny. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with hospices and how you incorporated them into the book?
That really came out of experience, at least, I said basically I had written the what if, a hypochondriac got the job of death, but I didn't write that book for a number of years after I had that idea. And in the intervening time, my mother had died of cancer, and I went back to Ohio and took care of her for the last 6 months of her life. And it was just me. I was the primary caretaker because I'm the only kid. Um, and then a couple years later, my wife's mother got pancreatic cancer, and she was called to go take care of her, and I was sort of the emergency backup care person. And although she's the youngest of four, I think her mom called her because she had had experience. She had helped me with my mom in the last month or so. So watching the hospice workers work with my mom and my wife's mother, and sort of those moments that become really vivid when someone's dying. I wanted to put those in the book. I wanted to show sort of what I had seen and what I experienced. And there's little conversations that the people who come to visit when someone's dying have that are drawn from actually me just eavesdropping on people that were coming to visit, my wife's mother, and just this weird sort of non sequitur things that these old ladies were saying to each other because they shared so much history. They had this shorthand, and so a lot of that stuff was just experience. It was just some stuff that I saw, and it probably didn't have as big a role in the book as I gave it. I mean, the book could have done without those moments, those little quiet moments of people in rooms dying, but that was as important to me and as all the flashy, dark, sort of macabre things that were happening out in the world, and making those fit together. One of the things that you find, or I have found, is that if you're going to write stuff that's supernatural and weird, and you're asking people to believe really insane stuff, then the real stuff has to feel very real, because they can go, oh yeah, sure, that seems completely real. That's emotionally honest, in its own way. I guess I'll buy the fact that there are, giant crow women living in the sewers and stuff like that. So that's sort of my take on it. Is so in that particular case, while most of the book is obviously imaginary, it comes out of using that tool of, this is my experience. How can I apply that rather than make the book about me? You just say, this is an emotional or historical experience I've had that can fit into this story. I think it's a big mistake to make the book about you. And it's not that you don't have anything to say. It's just that it's not about you. It's about a reader. And probably the biggest mistake I see among young writers is all they're doing is thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about communicating to someone else with this experience that is going to happen for the first time for the reader in their own environment. It's completely separated from the writer.
Right. So it sounds like you're conscious of how it's going to affect the reader and what kind of emotional response it's going to invoke. Are you conscious of the impact you want the reader to have, or when you're writing, do you just get into the zone and kind of let the characters develop themselves?
You do let the characters run a little bit because otherwise they don't have a personality, but you direct them the same way. Just imagine if you're directing a film, you're going to direct performances. And that's why you can see the same script done by different actors and directors, and it seems like a completely different play or movie. I try to be conscious of what I'm doing. I remember having this sort of wide awake, like, oh my God moment. I was about 25, 26, and I'd known for some time that I wanted to be a writer. And I was reading, I think, a story by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And I had a paragraph that sort of set me back on my heels because of its impact. And I thought, oh my God, he did that on purpose. And he has always known that. And I just found out this minute when I read this paragraph that you can do that, right? But so sometimes you have those revelations when you're learning the craft. But when I set out to write a book, I have something that I might want to accomplish with each scene. And sometimes it's going to be a plot point, and sometimes it's just going to be an emotional moment. And that's very particular to Lamb. It has a lot of scenes that I just want you to have that experience, and it may be only 3 or 4 paragraphs, but you're going to have, and it might be, it just cracks people up. I may write a whole scene just because it has a particularly funny joke at the end. Now, in the best of worlds, the scene does all of those things, but you can't always. You just have to have a single purpose going into it, and so yeah, most of that stuff's on purpose. You get stuff happens by accident sometimes. I'll be sometimes surprised when a reader says this part really, impacted me or touched me, but usually that's more about their experience than it is about your intent.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, one of the things that came to mind, and spoiler alert for those listening who haven't read the book Lamb, but you totally should. You may want to skip the next minute or so. One of the things that came to mind was the end of Lamb when Biff jumped off the cliff. That was super powerful to me. The setting, too, the way it was so dark, it was just palpable. Even right now, talking about it affects me.
Well, again, that goes to that there was an intent there, and the intent was, and it may have been in a way a failure of imagination for me because, as you ask yourself the what if questions of putting a story together, what if you were, that book starts out with what if you were Jesus's best friend, and you were going to use that to get girls. Um, and so, and but you were always going to be like the best friend of the quarterback. You were always going to be the guy, you were always going to be the wingman,
Yeah.
and that was just the way it was. But this is your best friend, right? And this is your best friend who's basically the consciousness of humanity, whose main doctrine is love one another and be kind. So when you start doing those what ifs, then you say, okay, what if I have this best friend and I go through the my entire life with this best friend, and then what would it be like to lose that person? And I honestly thought I wouldn't be able to handle it. And that's how the story ends, is that the main character can't deal with it. He can't deal with the magnitude of the loss. And so, that comes through. It's on purpose, but it's just basically because I went, okay, what if, and what if that happened? I don't think that I'd be able to deal with it. It would be such a devastating loss that, you just want to euthanize yourself to make the pain stop. And that's sort of what happened.
Wow, yeah, that's intense, and I would have never guessed that either. It's really good to know and a good practice to ask the what if questions when writing. Switching gears here, is there anything else you would have liked to be aside from being a writer?
Well, I think that, I don't know. I think that it takes a certain drive and desire to be able to want to do something and be decent at it. And there's other stuff I like to do, and I'm okay at. I'm a pretty good photographer, and I might have been able to make a living at that, but I don't think I loved it enough to pursue it. And in fact, I know that. I mean, I tried to do that, and I just kept sort of shrugging and going, okay, I don't want it badly enough. And I went to school for photography, so I kind of went across the country to a place where I thought, yeah, I'm the hot shit in this little town that I grew up in. But then I got there and everybody in my class was hot shit in the little town they grew up in. And they liked it a lot more than I did. I mean, they were, you'd go to parties at this school I went to, and everybody would sit around in the kitchen and talk about developers and stuff like that. And I'm like, seriously? I like taking pictures, but that's really nerdy.
Right.
But that's sort of what separated them from me. And I basically was bailing out my photography assignments by writing clever captions, at least for the first semester anyway. So I mean, there are other things that I sure would have loved to have done. I'm not good at any other thing. I mean, this is the only thing that I'm good enough at to have achieved any sort of success at. But I mean, I was a DJ for a while and I was okay at that. And
Really? You were a DJ?
Yeah. And if I had really wanted to do that, if I wanted to be a radio guy, I mean, quick thinking enough, and my voice when I was practicing was good enough, and I could have done those things, but I just didn't. I don't think I wanted it badly enough. So yeah, it was sort of this or nothing. I mean, but that said, the stuff that I was doing to make a living at, I made peace with that. I did things that I really didn't like to do. Like I was an insurance broker for a while, which I really hated. It was good money, but I really hated it.
I cannot see you as an insurance broker at all.
What's that? I know, but it was, I was really too young to be doing it. In fact, I would have, friends say, well, you should go into real estate, and I said, would you buy a house from somebody that looks like me? I look like I'm 12, and I did at the time. Yeah. I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And, but it was so disingenuous to me. I mean, I sort of touch on it in my book, Coyote Blue, where you put on a face to meet a face. I mean, you'd go into a house, and if they needed you to be a Republican, that's what you were that day. And if they needed you to be a Democrat, that's what you were that day. If they needed you to be Catholic, well, God bless,
Right.
Whatever, because it didn't matter. What mattered was that they signed and gave you a check. And, you didn't lie about and the guys that trained me were like, never lie about the product. Everything else is on the table. But it was highly unsatisfying. I developed a really outrageous drinking problem just dealing with that, or not dealing with it, as it were. So anyway, yeah, I think that I came to writing sort of after I'd crashed my life on pretty much all fronts at age 30. And I went, okay, this is something that you always told yourself, you could do. You better really put your head down and do it. And that was when I really started getting my shit together and writing my first book.
Oh yeah. Were you ever scared of, like, what if I don't make it? What if I don't make any money off of this?
Oh, dude, I've written 16 bestsellers and I'm still scared of that.
Holy shit. Where's the hope for the rest of us then? Seriously.
Yeah, there's no there. It's still, I'm still convinced that I'm going to fail every time I start in the beginning, middle, and end of every single book I've written. Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I hear that from a lot of people who I consider to be at the top of their game.
Right.
So maybe there's something to it.
Well, and there's a point too, and this is sort of happening to me as I guess get into the twilight of my career. There's a point where my wife says every time, she goes, "You say that every book," and I'm going, "No, but this time it's really true." And you start to convince yourself, "Yeah, this time it's really true." There's a part of it that drives you to make whatever you're doing better. I mean, there has to be some balance. You can't let it paralyze you. And that's what really writer's block is. I think Garrison Keillor once said, I think it was the best definition of writer's block is expecting yourself to be better than you are. Now, my definition of making a great project is setting something you're not sure you can do. But then you have to do it. You can't go, oh my God, it's not good enough, and not finish it. And that's sort of where people are, that, they just expect themselves to be better than they are. And there's times when you just have to write the crap down to get to anything that might be good.
Okay, let's pause the tape right there a little bit. These are some great quotables right here. Let's just reiterate. Making a great project is setting something you're not sure you can do, but then you have to do it. You can't go, oh my God, it's not good enough, and not finish it. There's times when you just have to write the crap down to get to anything good. I'm going to repeat this because it's really awesome, right? Making a great project is setting something you're not sure you can do, but then you have to do it. You can't go, oh my God, it's not good enough, and not finish it. There's times when you just have to write the crap down to get to anything good. I think that can be applied to just about anything in life, right? I think we need to call Tony Robbins up and have Christopher Moore get on stage with him. Wouldn't that be rad? I don't know if they'd really mesh, but maybe, I don't know.
And so that's a constant balance. as well as the balance between the humility that you have to bring to the page in order to make good art or tell good stories, and the complete hubris and arrogance that it takes that someone would want to pay you for something you just thought up. And that's a constant, that's a
It's a balancing act, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's sort of like it's like a scale that clips back and forth like a metronome. It's like, okay, because there's no balance there. There's just certain, it's a swinging pendulum, and you just get your work done sort of at that point where the pendulum's in the middle. And you have to learn to do it, but it's not by any means anything I'm mastered. It's just, I know I've gotten through it before, and that's what you get with the experience. That's what anybody that you talk to is going to have. It's like, well, yeah, I know I can do it. It might be horrible, but I know I can do it.
Yeah,
because I've done it before.
Yeah, and that's so interesting too, that you're talking about like walking the line between, on the one hand, filled with hubris, and on the other hand, still with humility. And really, whenever an artist puts out anything, there's a certain amount of vulnerability there, because it's like, look what I made to the world, and how's the world going to react to what it could be like this, your kindergartner that's drawing a picture and putting it on the fridge or whatever, who knows, but
your mom rips it off the fridge, take this shit away.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's how it is, but I like that. All right, that does it for part 1 of the 3-part Christopher Moore interview series. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll get into a little bit of politics, a little bit of what pisses off Christopher Moore, and what brings him joy. Things like that, and a number of other things, of course, such as traveling around the world to research your next writing project. It's pretty fascinating stuff, so check it out. See you later.